Good morning, UECG Metro East. Happy Lord's Day to all.
青山基督教会东区的兄弟姊妹主日好。
And Happy New Year as well.
同時祝您新年快樂。
I hope that one day we will be meeting face to face and greet one another with shaking of hands.
望一日咱有法通個面對面三拄來三合眾拜上主，並且有法通三合來洗手。
But this Lord's Day, allow me to share with you a passage from Daniel chapter 1 entitled, Christlike Life is in a Christless Society.
今仔早起，讓我對但以理書第一章一段經文來甲咱分享，就是一個題目叫做無基督的社會內面的基督徒生活。
You know, in studying Philippine history, we learned that our country was colonized by the Spaniards for more than 300 years.
當咱讀菲律賓的歷史的時陣，咱知影講咱這個國家曾經是西班牙國的殖民地就差不多300幾年久的時間。
As a colony, Filipinos were taught to adopt Spanish way of life, the way they live, speak, and think.
做一個殖民地咱菲律賓人就是要學習來採用在西班牙因的生活方式、講話，並且思考的方法。
Understanding a country's history helps us to understand the situation of Daniel and his friends during the time they were exiled to Babylon.
當咱咧讀這個歷史的時陣咱幫助咱有能了解講說，但以理甲伊懷朋友當時受掠到巴比倫國的時陣，迄款的處境。
They were taught a Babylonian way of life, learning their culture, literature, and spiritual belief.
當因佇受掠的時陣因受教就是關於巴比倫國的這種生活方式文化、文學，並且信仰方面。
This morning, we are going to see how Daniel and his friends remained faithful to God in assimilating their lives in the pagan world as God handed Judah over to the Babylonians.
今仔日早起，咱要學習的就是要看到但以理甲伊的朋友怎啊佇這個受掠的這個無信異教的國家的內面雖然有接受同化，但是因着有緣忠心來侍奉上帝。
Let's talk about God's faithfulness.
大先咱來講到上帝的信實。
Judah's exile from the land in Daniel's time was not merely an accident of fate or the tragic result of the expansion of Babylonian Empire.
猶太人受掠的時陣，這樣代志佇但以理的時陣並唔是一個偶然的代志也唔是一個悲傷的特別的結果。因為巴比倫國的這個空間而來。
As Daniel 1 verse 2 makes clear, the exile came upon Judah because the Lord handed King Jehoiakim over the power of Nebuchadnezzar.
咱來看但以理書第1章第2節的時陣這個真清楚的甲人講是上帝將約雅敬猶大王約雅敬交佇尼布甲尼撒王的手中。
And God gave his people into the hand of their enemies.
上帝將伊的子民交佇敵人的手中。
The Lord had warned Israel of the consequences of their sins in the book of Leviticus.
上帝曾經佇這個利未記的所在一定警告在以色列人關於因無尊敬，因的罪的結局是什麼？
God made a covenant with them, a covenant that included blessings for obedience and curses for disobedience.
上帝甲因曾經立約一個盟約的 内容是什么啊？就是当因顺服的时阵，通得到祝福；当因无顺服的时阵，就会受咒诅。
However, the exile of Daniel and his friends was not merely a fulfillment of the great covenantal curse of Leviticus 26.
然而，这个但以理甲伊的朋友，并且在伊实现这个利记26章所记的这个咒诅。
It was also the specific fulfillment of Isaiah's prophecy in 2 Kings 20:18.
事实上，这个也是以赛亚书预言伫列王记下20章所预言的代志具体的实现。
Judah's king Hezekiah had received envoys and a gift from Merodach-Baladan, son of the king of Babylon.
希西家王伊接受巴比伦国的使者，并且对这个比罗达巴拉旦，就是巴比伦王的囝来接受伊的礼物。
In response, Hezekiah showed them everything that was of value on his storehouses and all of his treasures.
伊做什么款的回应呢？希西家王得到这礼物以后，伊就将伊的宝库中间敞开，将所有的宝物财富互这使者来看。
For this action, he was condemned by the prophet Isaiah.
因为伊安尼做伊就责备。
Why was the Lord so upset with Hezekiah?
为什么上帝对伊所做这样代志非常的无欢喜呢？
The envoys of gifts and the envoys and gifts Hezekiah received from Merodach-Baladan was not just a friendly gesture of goodwill. Rather, it was a solicitation of help and support against Assyria.
因为这个巴比伦王的囝所带来使者在的礼物不是单单不是一款善意的友好的这个表示伊乃是要来要求以色列国就是希西家王甲因联合来攻击亚述国
So, when Hezekiah showed the envoy his treasure houses, he was responding positively on the alliance with the Babylonians to fight against the Assyrians.
所以当希西家王将这些宝物等使者看的时阵一方面伊就是用正面来回应因的要求意思讲要甲因联名来杀拍这个亚述国。
In spite of the Lord's miraculous deliverance of Jerusalem from the surrounding armies of Sennacherib and the Assyrians in the previous chapter of the book of Kings, Hezekiah was now looking to a political means for solving the Assyrian problem through alliance with Babylon.
尽管伫列王记上记下这所在所记载的，就是讲说上帝一定真正用心力来拯救耶路撒冷甲以色列国脱离亚述国甲西拿基立代志但是希西家王却袂记得伊可用咧亲切用政国的问题就是借着甲这个巴比伦国来联名
Politics had replaced trust in.
所以对这样代志，咱看到讲说，希西家王用政治来代替了伊对上帝的信靠。
This is not merely an ancient temptation. Modern people, too, may be tempted to place their hopes in political alliances rather than trusting the Lord wholeheartedly.
这不是单单过去古早时的一款的试探，现在咱的人，真侪人也是逐摆伫这款的试探当中，袂记得将咱的愿望放伫甲 在政治方面的连绵啊，咱袂记你讲这着用专心来信靠咱的上帝。
Isaiah's word of judgment on Hezekiah's action was specific and severe.
先知以赛亚所讲的对以西家王的这种审判，伊是非常的具体，并且真正严重。
Because Hezekiah sought to preserve his treasures by trusting Babylon, and the Babylonians would come to carry off everything in his palace.
因为以西家王选择要来保留伊在财富就是靠着信靠这个巴比伦国嘛，所以过后巴比伦国的人就来到这个所在，到以色列国，将这些所有宫殿内面的宝物拢带去。
This specific judgment came through from the opening words of Daniel chapter 1 verse 2.
这个具体的审判真正明显的对但以理书第1、第2章清楚的记载。
God's judgment upon Hezekiah had been faithfully carried through, just as Isaiah had said.
上帝的审判真正明显的按照先知以赛亚所讲的真真实的会发生伫以西家王的身上。
This shows us God's faithfulness in his words and covenant, isn't it?
这样代志，互人看真清楚，讲说上帝对伊所讲的话，甲伊的约是真正真实的。
And that is good. That is great.
这样代志，互人甲你讲真好。
Second point, let's talk about the encouragement of God's faithfulness.
第二点，咱来看就是上帝信实对咱的鼓励。
The recognition that their fate came from the hand of God as a faithful act of judgment was itself an encouragement to the exiles.
明白讲说，因所得的命令是来对上帝的手来的，是一款忠实的审判行为哦。这本身是对这种受虐的人一款的鼓励。
It shows that their future was not controlled by Babylon or its gods, but by the Lord, the God of heaven, Yahweh.
因清楚看到讲，因的将来，因的未来，不是受巴比伦甲伊的神诸神来控制，乃是受到上帝，就是这个天顶的上帝的主宰。
This is an important point. Matthew 10:29 says that the sparrow does not fall to the ground without God's permission.
这个是一个真重要的一点，就是亲像马太福音10章29节所记载的讲说，若唔是上帝的恩准这种麻雀一只拢袂会落地地上。
Which demonstrates that even the most trivial of events in our life are within God's view.
这互咱证明看到讲说真正细项无值得怪伊的一寡代志咱生命中的一寡代志有原是伫上帝的这个看视野的内面。
At the extreme, even the most wicked act of all time, the crucifixion of Jesus was also the outworking of God's predetermined purpose.
这个极端的就是讲说伫世上是人类历史中面最邪恶的一款的这个行动就是耶稣基督神定死这项代志事实上有原是伫上帝所预定的这个目的内面。
For us believers, Each circumstance is the Lord's means of sanctifying us.
咱做一个信徒，无论什么款的情形啊，拢是上帝啊一个机会，要互咱成圣。
He has not abandoned nor forgotten us.
因捌袂记，因捌弃绝咱。
On the contrary, He will walk through these trials with us and preserve us by His grace.
相反的啊，伊会甲咱伫咱的试炼的当中，甲咱同行，并且来保守咱，用伊的恩典来保守咱。
And this will then give us motivation to keep doing His will.
这项代志就有法当，互咱有这个推动力啊，通来继续来遵行伊的旨意。
And just to prove that God was faithful and the people during that time, the exiled people, are trusting God all the more, I want to highlight some few points. And let's start with the resisting of reprogramming.
就要证明讲说，当即在人受了的时阵是上因图，什么意思呢？咱对几项代志，咱就看者头前，就是咱看着讲因拒绝受改造，受巴比伦国改造。
It was the will of God that Daniel and his three friends Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah were exiled in Babylon.
这个但以理甲伊的三个朋友，哈拿尼亚、米撒甲米沙利甲阿撒利亚，因受了通讲是上帝本身的旨意啊。
The four were probably still in their teenage years when they were to be exposed to an intense program of re-education in Babylon.
第四位受了的时阵啊，因也阁是伫真正少年的时期啊，因遐所面对的是一个真正强烈，并且对因的教育搁在一个搁在教育的一个计划啊。
First, their very names were changed.
第一台先这个巴比伦国就先改换伊的名。
In place of their good, God-centered Hebrew and Yahwistic names, the Babylonians changed them to the Babylonian names.
本来因的希伯来古的名佮属上帝的名即在巴比伦国就该换名换做即在巴比伦文化的名。
Daniel means God is my judge.
但以理的意思是讲上帝是我的审判。
Hananiah means the Lord is gracious.
那尼亚的意思是讲上帝是仁慈的。
Mishael means who is what God is.
以色列的意思讲上是上帝，伊就是上帝。
And Azariah means the Lord is a helper.
阿撒尼亚的意思讲说上帝是帮助咱的。
They were changed to names Belteshazzar, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, respectively.
伊就改变名做撒德列、米撒、阿伯尼哥、伯提沙撒。
And these names were invoked to help the Babylonian gods, Marduk, Bel, and Nebo.
这些名意思就是讲说，要来帮助要得到这些巴比伦国精神的帮助啊。
Second, the four young men were also instructed in the language and literature of the Babylonians so that myths and legends would take place of the scriptures as the source. of their wisdom and worldview.
第二啊，即在少年人啊，也是受管束啊，即在巴比伦国言语伊文化文学啊，并且包括伊在神话、故事、传说啊，伊就是要望将这物件来代替圣经的假使啊，诚做因的聪明智慧甲世界观的这个来源啊。
Third, they were to be royally supplied from the king's table with daily allowances of food and wine so that they would become familiar to the life of dependence on their new master.
第三点啊，就是因所要食爱请的所有的物件，是要对王的这个苦来特定甲苦来底下来得到。这个就是要互因的熟悉，对这个对这个新的主人的生活的这款的依赖。
At the end of the 3-year reprogramming process, with their previous identity being taken away, they would then enter the service of Babylonian King Nebuchadnezzar.
这计划就是讲3年后啊，当因受完全改造的时阵，因也袂记得因过去的身份哦，或者讲因的身份一定受消灭的时阵，因就我当进入这个尼布甲尼撒王的这个服务的内面。
What's the main goal? Why they are doing this?
因的目的是什么呢？因为什么要安尼创呢？
The main goal of the whole procedure was to obliterate all memory of Israel and Israel's God from the lips and the minds of these young men, and to put in some dependence on the king of Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar, and their gods.
因第大的目的啊，就是要对这些青年人的头脑内面当伊受改造以后啊，将因过去对上帝的所有的明白，也该切起来该消灭啊，然后会你开始明白讲说，这只咧供应因的这个王这是因着挖苦的。
Isn't this how Satan still operates today?
这敢毋是撒旦所咧用的手段嘛？今仔日。
He may violently persecute believers in some parts of the world, yet often he works more effectively by seducing, deceiving us into forgetting God and thinking that our blessings come from somewhere else.
是的，这个撒旦真侪世界真侪所在，用强暴的方法来逼这座信徒。但是咱知影，伊更较有功效的方法，就是通过引诱甲欺骗咱，互咱袂记得上帝，并且认为讲说咱的祝福是来对别的所在、其他的所在来的。
Satan wants to control the educational process so that our children will grow up with his worldview, with his philosophies of life.
但爱伫遐控制咱一些教育的程序互咱的囡仔会中大的时阵所明白的，在世界观甲这个哲学生活的哲学是世界要互因的。
If he can further instill in us a sense of dependence upon the material comforts that make up our way of life, or certain pleasure of the world that we have grown to love, then he can far more effectively draw us away from the Lord.
耶稣撒旦有法当将咱该互咱会觉得讲说，咱完全是依赖这个世界在物质方面的，才有法当互咱得到舒服的生活的时阵，并且咱会挖过一寡的乐趣，通来互咱愈来愈爱这些世上的物件的时阵然后咱就看到讲，伊真正 有功效的，一定将咱拖愈来愈离开上帝。
Satan's fundamental goal is to take away our memory of God, to re-educate our minds to his way of thinking, and to instill in us a sense that all of the good things in life come from the world around us and from the satisfaction of the desires of our own flesh.
撒旦第基本的目的啊，就是希望对咱的这个思想的当中啊，将咱对上帝的记忆啊，全部会甲伊拆杀啊。伊伫也要用这款的教育啊，来再改造咱，互咱会有一款的思想，就是讲说世上所有的好的物件，拢是对这个世界来的啊，并且然后这种物件才有法来满足咱家己的肉体啊，甲需要啊。
A while ago we talked about resisting reprogramming. Now this time let's go about talking about dependence in God.
咁咱讲到因拒绝受改造现在咱讲到倚靠上帝。
Now, recognizing the Babylonian strategy helps us to see and evaluate the strategy of resistance formulated by the 4 young men.
当咱清楚明白讲说巴比伦国所用的这个策略的时阵咱就会了解讲这是4位青年人因所制定的家己一款抵抗的策略是什么
There are a lot of things that we can learn from them.
咱有法对因学习真侪项的功课。
To be sure, they did not outwardly resist the Babylonian system.
头前咱看到讲说并无伫外表方面来完全的抵抗这个巴比伦国的这个制度。
They also did not refuse to work for the Babylonians, perhaps because they recognized the hand of God in their situation.
相信因了解讲这项代志是上帝的旨意，上帝的手底下来控制，所以因也是无拒绝来为着巴比伦国来做工。
This reminds us that our calling is not to form Christian societies that are isolated from the world around us.
提醒咱讲说咱今仔日伫这个教会内面，咱毋是要来组织一寡基督教的这个团体就是这个团体，然后要对这个世界分别出来。
On the contrary, we should be active in pursuing the common good of the community in which God has placed us, whatever challenges may face us.
相反的咱应该就真正积极的来追求上帝将咱放伫这个社区顶面内面，看伊伊的旨意是什么，咱就怎样帮助来得到这个共同的利益
Now, in response to the process of reprogramming, as the 4 young men accepted the will of God for their lives and served the Babylonian community, they inwardly resisted the pagan reprogramming. Inwardly.
对伫这个巴比伦国所予因的这款的改造这4个青年人因虽然接受上帝的旨意来服侍服务这个巴比伦的这个社会但是咱知影伫因的心中因伫遐拒绝受这种异教的改造。
First, they did not refuse to answer when called by their Babylonian names.
头前就是跟应该换名，并且用巴比伦国的名来叫因的时阵，因并无伫遐来反对甲拒绝因。
They actually maintained their Jewish names and identities as well.
但是因犹原保持因犹太人以色列人的这个名字甲因的身份。
They lived with dual names as a reminder of their identities and as a reminder of the true nature of their God.
In 我的时阵，因用两个名就是双的名个，一个就是要提醒因看因的身份是啥物，另外一方面提醒因讲说因所相信的上帝的本性是啥物。
Here we are reminded to take every opportunity to celebrate our heavenly citizenship with other believers.
对于这件代志顶面，咱受提醒，咱就会记掠条每一个机会来庆祝咱做天国子民的这个国家。
Second, in response to re-education, the four preserve their biblical knowledge and perspective in the midst of a thoroughly pagan education system.
第二点就是对这个改造的回应因四个人继续保存因对这个上帝的话语的知识甲观点因为安尼因就记住这个依教的教育的系统。
They armed themselves with biblical discernment into its follies and flaws, and we are to do the same as well.
因利用圣经的假使来装备因家己，来分别即种唔对愚讲甲缺陷的这个依教的制度。
Third, this is kind of an interesting part. In response to the food, Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine, as what we read from Daniel 1:8-16.
第三点，对于但以理书第1章第8到16节，咱看到讲但以理立志无要用王的食物，甲伊所的酒来玷污家己。
The issue here was not that these foods are not Jewish food, nor it has been offered to idols. That's not the issue.
即个问题并毋是讲到讲跩物件是属于巴比伦国的食物也是讲说因为毋是犹太人所咧食的物件，也是讲说跩物件已经受限伫即跩偶像的面前
If that was the reason, Daniel would have had abstained permanently from it, but which does not seem the case in chapter 10, verse 3.
因为当跩物件若是完全的这个邪恶，还是玷污咯，咱就知影讲说，但以理的完全永远的袂要去担即跩物件，但是咱对在10章第3节，咱看到讲，并毋是安尼
The key to understanding why they abstained from these food is to notice that they chose to eat only food that naturally grow, grains and vegetables, and they only drink water.
我通明白，咱了解讲说因敢若无要食即跩物件，是因为因愿意选择讲说即跩自然生长的物件，亲像五谷、蔬菜，然后伊时候要啉水。
This suggests a reminder of their dependence upon their creator for their food, not the king of Babylon.
因为因爱用安尼来提醒家己讲说，因所活口的收取因食物的是创造因的上帝，毋是尼布甲尼撒王。
So also we need to build into our daily routines constant reminders of our dependence upon God for all of the good things in our lives.
因为咱着伫咱逐日的生活当中来提醒咱家己，讲说咱伫生命所得的一切好处是完全外靠上帝而得的。
Even such a simple act of giving thanks for our food may be profound reminder of who has provided it for us.
就是真正简单的一个谢恩谢饭的祈祷哈，就是我人亲切会伫遐提醒咱讲说，是谁来供给咱。
Also, Daniel and his friends sought to maintain their faithfulness to God by working within the Babylonian system, not against it.
我另外一项就是咱看到讲，但以理甲伊的朋友啊，因祈求方法来保持伫即个巴比伦的制度的内面啊，保持因对上帝的忠心啊。
They sought permission from the chief official for their personalized diet plan in verse 18.
伫18节甲咱讲说，因当即个太监长来要求并且允准，互因得到允准来得到因一个因家己个别的即个现实的方法。
And proposed a 10-day test. 10-day test.
因并且提出讲说会用10日来做。
Surprisingly, at the end of this time, Daniel and his friends looked fitter than those who had been indulged in the high-calorie lifestyle.
真奇妙就是当即个点睛过了的时阵但以理甲伊的朋友看起来比怀因咧啉食真正高热量的即种生活方式的人佫显得佫较健康
So, for 3 years, the guard agreed to continue to provide them their alternative way of life, by which they could maintain their constant awareness of the one true God.
因为安尼所以即个委办就同意讲说第3年来按照因所选择的生活方式来互因食甲穿因为安尼因就法当讲说通一直的保持对上帝无停的即个了解
My friends, today we have learned so much of God's faithfulness to His covenant.
弟兄妹，咱今仔日对这个这段经文，咱学习到讲说，上帝对伊所立的约是真正信实的。
The good news of the gospel is not simply that God is faithful to those who are faithful to Him. It is that a Savior has come to deliver faithless and compromised saints like us.
今仔日的好消息就是这个福音并不是单单甲咱讲说上帝是信实的对伫在信靠伊的人，但是伊却甲咱讲说有一个救主来到要拯救的拯救的是什么人拯救就是在无忠心，并且同埋妥协的亲像咱在人。
Our salvation rests not on our ability to remain undefiled by the world, but rather on the pure and undefiled offering that Jesus has provided in our place.
咱的救恩并不是在咱有什么能力和来拒绝或者讲说保持咱家己无受这个世界来玷污乃是在乎为咱提供这个纯洁而且无受玷污的祭物就是耶稣基督为咱所摆上的。
Jesus Christ came voluntarily into this world with all of its pain, all of its trials.
耶稣基督带着出来痛苦甲艰难啊，但是伊却自愿来到这个世界啊，来为着咱。
And he endured far greater temptations and sufferings than Daniel did, or than we ever will.
耶稣基督来到世上的时阵，伊所忍受的即种试探、痛苦啊，通讲是比但以理当时所受的更较多啊。同时也是咱每一个人所拄到的痛苦啊，是永远甲伊袂比的。
What is more, Jesus has already returned from his exile and now sits at the right hand of the Father in heaven.
什么更较重要呢？耶稣基督今仔日一定对伫这个受掠，就是来到世间这样代志啊，一定得胜了。现在伊一定坐伫天父上帝伫天国迄个所在的正边。
He has prepared our place there, and his presence there already is the guarantee that one day we will be with him as his people.
伊去为咱备办所在，伊伫迄个所在证明公式是一个对咱一日咱要去到伊个所在，甲伊做一个正做伊主民的一个保证。
The cross is the means by which God's faithfulness redeems the unfaithful.
上帝借着十字架救赎了无信的人，来到上帝的这个信息的内面。
The resurrection and the ascension are the guarantee of our inheritance in heaven.
搁活甲升天这样代志，保证公说，咱会伫天国承受这个产业。
So, my friends, lastly, allow me to remind us of the application. Remind ourselves of the gospel.
咱借着今仔日的信息来应用伫咱的生命，头一点，咱得用福音来提醒咱家己。
Let us fix our eyes on Jesus crucified, raised, and exalted.
咱就将咱的目睭注目伫耶稣基督受顶、国活甲提受升天这样代志。
Trust in him and ask him to put us in places where we can be a blessing to our community.
咱就信靠伊，并且向伊祈求，可以将咱放伫即种社会的所在，互咱有法通诚侪因的祝福。
Third, be a breath of heavenly wisdom in our home, school, workplace.
过来就是讲，咱伫咱工作的所在，咱的学堂咱的厝内，诚侪天国的智慧的一个器。
Fourth, be consistently depend upon his sanctifying work.
第四点就是讲，咱着始终会活靠伊的正圣的工作。
Let us look to Jesus to keep us faithful, not to be our best efforts to be a Daniel.
咱着看上帝，并且仰望伊，互咱保持咱诚侪忠心，而毋是活靠咱家己的努力来诚侪这个但以理。
Lastly, long for the day when his heavenly kingdom will invade this earth and bring the fullness of our inheritance.
最后，咱就渴望迄一日，当伊的天国进入伫咱的地球，并且带来 咱要承受的丰盛的产业。
My friends, I hope you enjoyed your worship service this morning as we have studied the faithfulness of God in the life of the exiled people.
第二要我感谢你，感谢主，我愿望讲说，对今仔日的信息，你会真正得到帮助，因为咱对但以理的生活生命中，看得到上帝完全信实。
May the Lord use us mightily wherever we are to show our faith in Jesus.
上帝无借着伊来使用咱，无论咱伫什么所在，靠着耶稣基督的救恩来，互咱国家我当荣耀。
God bless you.
上帝祝福你。